Well, it looks like there's more righteous anger going around in DC Comics, but is Wonder Woman this time going too far and feeding a sinful craving inside of all of us? Or is she acting, as the story wants to suggest, out of love? I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Welcome to Essential Issues Weekly, where I talk about DC Comics 1 week after their release on the Ultra tier of the DC Universe Infinite subscription service. In each installment, I pick an assortment of comics to talk about as a DC fan and also explore, what, if anything, they have to say about the essential issues of real life. Now, warning, full spoilers for everything I'm going to talk about. That's your only warning. We're taking a look now at comics originally released to the Ultra tier on March 19th, 2025, originally published February 19th, 2025. First from that group is Zatanna #1, part of DC's All-In initiative. There was a mini-series about Zatanna that was possibly intended to be like an alternate continuity. It wasn't really clear to me. I think it might have even been Black Label, I'm not sure. But that got me interested in Zatanna and wondering if I could enjoy a book about her. And Zatanna #1 gave me a chance to kind of test that theory. Now, I think this is by a different creative team. The art, at least, I'm pretty sure is, but the tone also feels different than that miniseries that came out recently. This, I think, it's somewhat whimsical, but I think it might appeal to those who are interested, this is going to sound weird, but are interested maybe in musicals and who love being in musicals. I certainly was that kid in high school and some even after high school. Anybody with a performance background, I think, will have some things that they can connect to, relate to with Zatanna, because this new series is seemingly going to focus on her and her supporting cast of like crew and other support members of her show, her magic show. And there's even a little indication at the very beginning that maybe she's got a heavier heart than she lets on. She starts out in kind of like this darker, contemplative place, and then when a knock comes to the door and says, hey, we're ready for you, Zatanna, then she like kind of just gears herself up and goes out, and she's smiling broadly and widely to her team when she gets out there. And so, but then that's not really touched on in the rest of this issue. I'm hoping that they'll circle back to that and kind of deal with this felt need of hers to put on a smile for others, even when that's not really where she's at. I think that could be really interesting. But the rest of the story, unfortunately, felt very light. And I personally, I just don't like the backwards talk for magic. I stopped long ago bothering to read and figure and like try to read backwards. What is she saying backwards? I don't care. It's going to be something basic, something silly, and it's going to achieve the effect that's the justification for her being able to do what she's doing in the panel right in front of me. So instead, I'll just cut to the chase. I'll just look at the gobbledygook and then see what happens in the next panel, and that'll tell me roughly what she was probably saying backwards, because it's just an exercise I find, I guess, irritating. So, and looking at how they're going to lean on it based on this first issue, may be an indication that this book just isn't for me, combined with the other elements like the lighter tone and the somewhat whimsical tone and stuff like that. But I'm willing to give it another issue in hopes that they will circle back to that moment at the beginning that implies that, she's got a heavier heart than she lets on, because that could do some really interesting things and help me to engage with Zatanna as a character. I want to know what's going on beneath the broad stage smile, because then I can understand what drives her as a character. And that's what pulls me into books most of all, is a sense of what drives the character and whether or not I can relate at all to it. I think Zatanna and I, me coming from a performance background and still doing some performance-related stuff, I could potentially be a big fan of this book if they maybe course correct or make some choices obvious in the continuation of this book that I haven't seen yet. So that's Zatanna #1, a big we'll see in my mind, but also kind of probably not. Nightwing #123 is continuing this storyline where Dick Grayson is trying to manage these gang wars that are erupting and trying to keep them under control, trying to even work with some of the gangs to try to encourage them to not go into all-out war. it's been just kind of like a serviceable story for me in terms of giving me a Nightwing fix and giving me kind of the tone, the pretty fairly serious tone that I want, with just a few quips here and there. There was a funny moment where he did the alliteration preceded by holy thing that Robin used to be known for, which of course he was the first Robin and the one that was known for that. But like he said, holy something halitosis, an H word that has to do with acid, I think. And it was just kind of a funny, I was going to say out of character moment, but yeah, it was just, it was an interesting moment. I don't think they were playing it like he's normally that cheesy. I think they were maybe playing it for a little bit of like irony, a little bit of dryness, but Nightwing is known to quip every now and then, certainly compared to Batman and a number of other heroes. But the story itself has not been super sucking me in. The general mood, of the book is one that I like, but the story itself not really pulling me in. So I'll be ready for this story to be over. But in the meantime, I'm very content to read it and just keep tabs on Nightwing. So that's Nightwing 123. Robin, Year 1, Number 5, continues to be an interesting read, in part because of the art style that evokes the art in Batman Year 1. And then in this issue, Clayface really comes into the picture, and I loved Clayface as a villain in the Batman animated series from the 90s. That was my first exposure to him, and they are bringing kind of that version of Clayface, into this story, and it's basically Batman's first experience with this version of Clayface. And so I guess I don't often respond to nostalgia, but I was feeling it a little bit. I think partly the simplistic art style both harkens back to Batman Year 1 and the Batman animated series. A little bit of a 1-2 punch there. So I'm liking the vibes of this. I'm still appreciating some of the conflict going on as Robin is kind of learning how to operate under Batman and his direction, and he's kind of rebelling against that some. So I'm appreciating some of those character dynamics, but it's still another book that I'm just kind of like, I'm content to read, but I'm not being dazzled by it. So that's Batman and Robin Year 1, Number 5. Then we've got The Question All Along the Watchtower, Number 4, which recently in a publication like splash page was revealed to be a 5-issue series, a 6-issue series. I think DC does that sometimes. They don't tell you, because like there's nothing on the cover that says this is issue 4 out of a certain number. But I think sometimes they do that when books aren't doing well and they realize, okay, we need to wrap this up. So now they're marketing it as kind of a mini-series. And I was, as I commented earlier, really interested in the potential for this series, for it to kind of show some of the flaws of superheroes and some of the ways that they would need to be kind of kept accountable, and could be by The Question. But they didn't really go that route. It ended up being like, oh no, there's mind control stuff going on, and it's just a basic, villain plot again. The one kind of like rescuing thing for this story at this point is that it's revealed that it's like a Superman revenge squad, and it's specifically characters from the 90s that were among the first Superman villains I was exposed to in the comics. It was around the 90s that I kind of started getting a comic here and there. Of course, the death of Superman was a significant part of that. And then the stories after that, like Conduit was the main villain in the death of Clark Kent, which came a few years after, Superman came back from the dead. So Conduit's here, Eradicator, Hank Henshaw, the Cyborg, a couple other characters I'm not remembering at the moment, but it's neat to see some of these characters come back and to pose a threat once again, when a lot of them have been sidelined and forgotten for a while. But other than that, I mean, I can see why this book isn't really grabbing people. It's a nice novelty, these villains, and I'll be content to finish out this storyline, but not near what I had hoped it would be or thought it could be when I started out The Question All Along the Watchtower, and that's issue number 4. What I want to spend the bulk of my time talking about, though, is Wonder Woman 18. This seems to be getting really close to Wonder Woman's final confrontation with the Sovereign, the sort of Uncle Sam anti-Wonder Woman combo that's been the villain that's been narrating this long story arc since Tom King took over writing for Wonder Woman. I've said that although I really liked the start and I liked a lot of what Tom King was doing with this story, it has worn out its welcome. I've been ready for this story to be wrapped up for 2 or 3 issues now, so I'm glad that it looks like we're finally getting to that last confrontation that's going to bring this thing to a close. But, you know, and I think it'll be probably a fitting end, a satisfying end, but I'm wondering if it's going to be satisfying in a way that's not exactly healthy for us, based on the way that Wonder Woman interacts with 2 characters right before she steps into the White House to have her final confrontation with Sovereign. So let's take a look at that. So the first person she encounters opposing her on the White House lawn, well, after some troopers shooting guns that she doesn't have any problem with, is Sergeant Steele, who greets her when she says his name by responding, "The one and only, darling." And so already we've got a little bit of kind of a sexist, chauvinistic kind of vibe in the way that he's talking to Wonder Woman here. That's followed up on when he says, "You sure you want to continue there, my dear?" Meaning, like, you know, to the White House, but calling her my dear, this kind of falsely affectionate way of talking to her. Again, has little vibes of chauvinistic superiority and sexism. Well, after he kind of greets her with these this kind of superior sexist flavor, she advances on him and looks at his hand that has been replaced since the last time they met, and said, "Oh my, look at this. They did a fine job rebuilding it. It is a shame, no?" And then in the next panel, she rips it off and he screams. And then on top of that, she says, "I want to say, I like how you are not using that word you used once, the word that angers me." And I took about 10 minutes just now to try and find what she was talking about. It was all the way back in issue number 1 of this run with Tom King. And they kind of gobbledygook it out so you don't know what he said. But in the next panel in issue number 1, after he says, "you blank," she says, "I do not like that word. You use it for women, and it is not good." So it's, I don't know if it's the B word or the C word or whatever, but something along those lines. It's so it's a sexist insult or slur that he was known to use, and she remarks that he's not using that word that had angered her before. And then standing over him, we have an angle looking up at her while he is now on the ground nursing his lost hand. She continues saying, "It demonstrates you have grown, sir. All this being defeated over and over, it has taught you something. This is good for you." And he's going, you know, in great pain. And I was trying to figure out, there was part of this moment that I think was satisfying, part of it that was not, that I was like, this is rubbing me the wrong way. And I had to try and figure out what the heck is bothering me about this. And there's another scene that it similar to this that I'll talk about in a second, that helped me figure it out as I was kind of like ruminating on both of them. Sergeant Steele and the other opposition that she encounters, these are guys that are stopping her, or trying to stop her from getting to a man that has caused all kinds of death, all kinds of terrible things. And so it is right for us as readers to want her to totally just plow through these guys and get to the one causing all the death and put an end to it. We want that as readers. That's kind of like the core thing about superhero comics that's satisfying to us, is seeing the wrong things righted, seeing the bad things stopped. And so that is satisfying. It's also satisfying to me that while she is clearly being undervalued, underestimated, diminished in the way that he is referring to her and to women, that in the face of that, she is still overcoming. She is still shown to be strong. She is still victorious. These are good things as well. But what was rubbing me the wrong way, I realized, is that it's the moment that she deals out not even necessarily justice, but pain. When she deals out pain to this character and the next one we'll look at, it is right in the context of them saying these sexist things. And I think that's meant to be gratifying for us. We're meant to see what they say, feel a distaste toward it, and then feel satisfaction at one moment later them experiencing pain. And while she's dishing out this pain, she is in this has this superior, I don't know if condescending is the right word, but like taking on the role of this patient teacher and stuff, as though she is being very patient in this situation. But I don't know how patient she's being. I don't know how truly superior she is being. Maybe the Wonder Woman character in this moment does have like a purity to her, but the way this is being written and the way I think it's meant to make us feel does not put us as readers who would respond to this in a very good position. It puts us in the position of feeling gratified that a person whose perspective, values, behavior we dislike, we are getting pleasure from them experiencing pain. And despite Wonder Woman saying that Sarge is not using the word that makes her angry, she says, still though, despite your truly noble effort at restraint, I do find myself, and then she knees him in the face and follows up saying, angry. So she is angry. And I think we as an audience are meant to be angered, bothered, irritated by Sarge Steele's treatment of Wonder Woman. And so I think that there's a way in which this is appealing to our desire to see those whose behavior we dislike, whose worldview and perspective we dislike, that irritates us. It's appealing to our natural but sinful desire to see them hurt. The second example is when she encounters General Glory standing in opposition to her. Now, initially, his language sounds a little more respectful. He says, "Ma'am, you got no business doing whatever this is." So that sounds like a respectful opener from someone who disagrees with her. But then he follows up by saying, maybe you ought to just get on your hands and knees and thank God there's someone around who can stop you, which now puts him in a very superior position, a very arrogant position in which he sees himself as standing over her, even though he's using this kind of polite language of ma'am. And I think this is probably a reflection in some ways on what was being commented on issues ago when the writing was kind of taking Wonder Woman up against this overly simplistic 1950s view of male and female roles and stuff like that. And so I think this is, General Glory is in some ways meant to be a continuation of that ideology that Wonder Woman is going up against. She says, the flag, please. When you fall, I will not see that great symbol fall with you. And then he says, you shouldn't talk like that, ma'am. You don't know what you're facing. If Uncle Sam asked me to move the moon, I'd move the moon. So again, coming off a little bit superior toward her, even though he is using the polite title of ma'am. And then he takes it all the way by saying, I don't think I'm going to have so much trouble with a girl in a tiara. She takes the flag, says, no, not a girl, and then like a whining child throwing a tantrum in the next panel. That's his facial expression. He says, what? Give me that back, you little... And then she continues to say, woman, and follows up with the art using the special kind of like logo version of her name, saying Wonder Woman is what she says. And she gives him an uppercut. There's a spray of blood that goes flying everywhere. Again, a moment that we are supposed to find satisfying because of the way he was demeaning her with his language just before, calling her a girl in a tiara and about to call her a little something else, and then gets this massive uppercut that we are supposed to find satisfying. It's not in the context of him threatening lives that she punches him. It's not in the context of really anything else except for the immediate context. The immediate context, I want to be clear, is this sexist viewpoint that he's representing. Now, is this problematic because these are just fictional characters? If these characters are merely stand-ins symbolically for a view that is harmful, that we don't want to see perpetuated, then yes, if it's interpreted and felt by the reader on that level, then I think that can be satisfying as we think to ourselves, yes, we should be done with that. There should be no more of the sexist treatment of women. But I think the default mindset does not take us there. The default is just this emotional level emotional level satisfaction at seeing someone who is distasteful being hurt, experiencing pain. And this appeals to, I think, arguably all of us on some level. Why do I say that? I think that's borne out in how successful YouTube thumbnails are. Successful because so many people are using them, and so they're clearly working. That will say something like I'll see thumbnails and I'll click on them now and then. Sometimes I wonder, is it the thumbnail? Do I want to see this person destroyed or whatever? So I have to catch myself. Most times I think I'm just curious about, okay, what are the arguments that are going to be presented? But I get in the algorithm that YouTube feeds me thumbnails that will say something like, such and such woke person gets destroyed by so-and-so. We have this really violent language when we're talking about these kind of discussions or debates between two opposing viewpoints. But that idea of an opponent being just destroyed clearly appeals to us on some level. And I don't think that's healthy. I don't think we're meant to want to see those we are opposed to destroyed. Now, if they are like an enemy on the battlefield or something like that, that's a different thing. When I'm talking about our opponent, I'm talking about the garden variety opponent that most of us deal with, which is usually someone that we very much disagree with, or maybe not even a specific person, but just kind of like a demographic with a particular viewpoint that we strongly disagree with. We see them as our opponents. Well, what does Scripture say about how we're to think about and treat our opponents as we're interacting with them? If you do a search in the ESV translation of the Bible using the word opponents, there's two verses that come up, passages that come up. The first is Philippians 1, 27 through 30. He says, "Only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or am absent, I may hear of you that you're standing firm in one spirit with one mind, striving side by side for the faith of the gospel, and not frightened in anything by your opponents." He goes on to say, "This is a clear sign to them of their destruction, but of your salvation, and that from God. For it has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ you should not only believe in him, but also suffer for his sake, engaged in the same conflict that you saw I had, and now hear that I still have." I think that our opponents and the success maybe they seem to be having in our particular situation, if it's a really localized particular person that we're dealing with, or I think more often as we're browsing the internet and blah, 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 with whatever stuff online, we maybe get a sense that those who are ideologically opposed to us are winning, they're gaining ground, they're having an effect on the culture, and that disturbs us. I think what we often are not willing to admit is it makes us afraid. We're afraid of what will happen if those who are ideologically opposed to us gain ground, gain influence, and have an effect on the culture, our own living situation, the situation of our family. There's fear there. And we often skip any recognition of that fear and jump straight to what we presume to be righteous anger. But that's not actually what's really going on. There's something fearful in us because of our opponents. But we are called to not be afraid of our opponents, to be trusting the Lord in those circumstances, and also expect that we are going to suffer for the sake of Christ. That our opponents may gain some ground, and we might have to deal with the repercussions of that in terms of like what we're dealing with in life, in our schools, in our workplace, or whatever. We have to expect to suffer for his sake. That doesn't mean that we don't offer any kind of like respectful opposition in terms of dialoguing with people, trying to gain influence ourselves and gain sway ourselves. It doesn't mean we're saying no to that. It just means on an emotional level, we're not being driven by fear. We're being driven by love. The other passage is 2 Timothy 2. Let's see here. We'll start in verse 24 and go through 26. 2 Timothy 2, 24 through 26, and the ESV says, "And the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kind to everyone, able to teach, patiently enduring evil, correcting his opponents with gentleness." God may perhaps grant them repentance leading to a knowledge of the truth, and they may come to their senses and escape from the snare of the devil after being captured by him to do his will. So our opponents are not those that we should feel satisfied to see them hurt or want to see them hurt. We shouldn't crave to see those ideologically opposed to us get destroyed, even if it's just verbally, get embarrassed or ashamed or on their heels, on the ropes in a verbal debate of some kind. We shouldn't crave to see them in that state. We should crave to see truth be persuasive to them and to those that are listening. But we shouldn't crave to see them defeated. We should crave to see them come around to a knowledge of truth and all the good that comes with that. And so when I see these moments in Wonder Woman 18, I'm like, man, in some ways I can relate and I resonate with these, but in another way I'm like, I don't know if it's healthy for me to be resonating with these perhaps in the way that I'm intended to. Okay, so yeah, that's Wonder Woman number 18. And oh yeah, as far as ring selection, I went with the red ring for rage, not because any of this is making me angry, but just because, hey, anger seems to be a major issue that is coming to the forefront, maybe unintentionally, in Wonder Woman 18, something really worth us thinking about as we're engaging with content that maybe is meant to feed cravings in us that are not very healthy. So the red ring definitely came to mind for that, and I think those are all of my thoughts on comic books for now. As always, I'd love to get your thoughts about the comics I've talked about, the comics that I didn't. Leave those in the comments below, and go check out christiangeekcentral.com, where you can get this content as its own podcast, Essential Issues, or our weekly Christian Geek Central podcast. All of that made for you there as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.